The moment I woke up, I knew something was terribly wrong. A noise, faint yet distinct, echoed through the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to make sense of the sound. It wasn't the usual creak of an old house settling, nor the soft hum of the refrigerator running in the kitchen. This was different. A sharp rustling, the muted clink of metal against metal. Someone was inside my house. I froze, gripping the covers, straining my ears. A chill slithered down my spine. My breath became shallow. Then a muffled voice, followed by the sound of a drawer slamming shut. My stomach twisted into knots. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers trembling. The screen glowed dimly in the darkness, but just as I was about to dial, a terrifying thought struck me. What if they heard me? What if they realized I was awake? Silence stretched through the house, thick and suffocating. The next noise was unmistakable, slow, measured footsteps moving through the hallway. Toward my room. I had to move. Now. Carefully, I slid out of bed, every muscle in my body taut with fear. My bare feet met the cold wooden floor. I crept toward the door, inching it open just enough to peek outside. The hallway was dark, shadows stretching ominously from the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Downstairs, the living room was dimly illuminated by the streetlight outside, casting eerie shapes against the walls. Two figures moved within the flickering glow, their faces obscured by black masks. They were ransacking my house. The object of their desire. Jewelry, cash, electronics, they tossed things aside with reckless abandon, stuffing valuables into a duffel bag. But then one of them paused, lifting something into the light. My blood ran cold. The wooden box. A seemingly ordinary, unremarkable object, but to me it was everything. They weren't just here for money. They had come for that. Why? How did they even know about it? My pulse thundered in my ears as the taller thief opened the box. Though I couldn't see its contents from where I stood, I didn't need to. I knew what lay inside: documents, photographs, secrets buried deep in the past. The kind of secrets that should have remained hidden forever. I gripped the doorframe, struggling to stay silent, my mind racing. Should I confront them? Call for help? One of the thieves spoke, his voice low and urgent. We got it. Let's go. The other hesitated. Check the rest of the place first. My stomach dropped. If they came upstairs, if they found me, I wouldn't stand a chance. A desperate decision. I needed to act. Now. My gaze darted around the room, searching for anything I could use to protect myself. My breath hitched when I saw the heavy glass lamp on my nightstand. If I had to, I could use it as a weapon. But could I actually fight back? My heart hammered as I heard their footsteps again, creaking against the floorboards. Closer. Closer. Then, a sudden sound from outside. The distant wail of sirens. The thieves stiffened. Shit, someone called the cops. Panic rippled between them. The one holding the box zipped up the duffel bag. We gotta move. Within seconds, they darted toward the back door. I barely had time to process what was happening before they were gone, swallowed by the night. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Slowly, hesitantly, I crept downstairs. The house was in disarray, drawers overturned, furniture displaced, but my gaze locked onto the now empty space where the box had been. It was gone. And with it, the truth I had spent years trying to bury. Somehow, someway, they knew. And now they had it. What happens next? My legs nearly gave out beneath me, but I forced myself to stay upright. The questions swirled like a storm in my mind. Who were they? How did they know about the box? And most terrifying of all, what were they planning to do with what was inside? Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft golden hues across the disheveled living room. The aftermath of the break-in lay before me, a chaotic mess of overturned furniture, scattered papers, and an eerie silence that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. But none of that mattered. Not now. My eyes locked onto the empty space where the wooden box had been. My hands trembled as I pressed them to my temples, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The reality of what had happened crashed over me in relentless waves. They had taken it. They had taken the box. A cold, nauseating dread twisted in my gut. That box wasn't just an old keepsake. It wasn't a collection of meaningless trinkets. It held secrets. Dangerous secrets. The weight of the past. I stumbled toward the kitchen, barely aware of my surroundings. My mind was drowning in memories, ones I had tried so desperately to forget. Years ago, my husband had sat in this very room, his hands clutching that same wooden box, his face etched with guilt. If anything happens to me, don't open it. Just destroy it. I had nodded, never asking questions, never pushing for answers. But curiosity had gnawed at me over the years, and one night, long after he was gone, I had given in. Inside, I had found newspaper clippings, letters, and worst of all, a police report detailing a fatal accident. A hit and run. The victim's name was circled in red ink, a single word scrawled beside it, "Forgive me." The shock had left me breathless. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted, had been responsible for a stranger's death. Now, the box was gone. And someone knew about it. The call that changed everything. The shrill ring of my phone shattered the silence. My pulse spiked as I grabbed it, my fingers slick with sweat. The number was unknown. I hesitated for only a second before answering. A voice, deep, measured, and unfamiliar, greeted me. "If you want the box back, meet me at Willow Creek." Alone. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" Silence. Then the click of the call ending. I stared at the phone, my mind spinning. Willow Creek. It was an abandoned rest stop on the outskirts of town, a place long forgotten. Whoever had stolen the box knew its contents. They knew what my husband had done. And now they wanted me to come to them. A desperate decision. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to breathe. I had two choices: involve the police and risk exposing everything, or go to Willow Creek and face whoever was behind this. I knew what my husband would have wanted me to do. He had carried his guilt in silence for years, protecting me from the truth. And now I had to protect him. My fingers clenched into fists. There was no choice. I was going to Willow Creek. The road to Willow Creek was long and desolate. Each mile that passed felt heavier than the last, pressing down on my chest with a weight I could barely endure. The early morning mist clung to the trees, curling like ghostly fingers around their trunks. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My thoughts were a tangled mess of fear, anticipation, and questions I couldn't answer. Who was behind this? How did they know about the box? And what would they do to me once I arrived? The closer I got, the stronger the sinking feeling in my stomach became. I wasn't just walking into a negotiation. I was walking into a reckoning. An unexpected face. I pulled into the abandoned rest stop and killed the engine. Silence engulfed me. The place was just as I remembered, forgotten by time, overtaken by nature. The wooden benches were cracked, the paint peeling from the faded signs. And then I saw him. Standing beneath a lone streetlight was a figure I recognized instantly. Daniel. My neighbor. My breath caught in my throat. Of all the people I had imagined, I had never expected him. He wasn't just a friendly neighbor. He had been a friend. Someone my husband had trusted. Yet here he was, holding the wooden box in his hands, his expression unreadable. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped out of the car, my body tense. "Daniel," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I should be asking you that." The truth revealed. I took a step closer, my eyes darting to the box. "You broke into my house." His lips curled into something between a sneer and a grimace. "You act surprised." His voice was laced with bitterness. "But you shouldn't be." A lump formed in my throat. "Why?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I know, Claire." His fingers tightened around the box. "I know what your husband did." Cold terror washed over me. Daniel's eyes burned with an emotion I couldn't quite place: rage, grief, betrayal. "My son," he whispered. "He died that night." I staggered back as if he had struck me. "No, it couldn't be." "My son," he repeated, his voice breaking. "The boy your husband hit with his car. He was mine." I felt the ground shift beneath me, the weight of his words suffocating. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside, beneath the documents, was a folded piece of paper. A letter. With shaking fingers, he pulled it out and unfolded it. The silence stretched between us as he read. His eyes moved over the words, his breath uneven. His lips parted slightly, and I saw something change in his face. Shock, then something else. Pain. I swallowed hard. "What does it say?" His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "It's from him. From your husband." I took a step closer. "What does it say?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the letter toward me, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. My hands trembled as I took it, my vision blurring as I read my husband's familiar handwriting. "Daniel, there is no forgiveness for what I have done. No way to undo the pain I caused you. But I have tried. In ways you will never know. Your son's death was my fault. I have lived every day knowing that. I have watched you grieve, and I have grieved in silence. But I did not just watch. I did what little I could to make things right. The hospital bills, the anonymous payments, that was me. Your daughter's college fund? That was me. The job you got when you thought you'd never work again? That was me. I never wanted you to know. Not because I was hiding, but because it could never be enough. Because I didn't deserve thanks. I only wanted to help you carry the weight I put on your shoulders. I am sorry, Daniel. More than words can say. I hope that one day the weight will be lighter for you. Even if I do not deserve it. A sob rose in my throat. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. His shoulders shook. I hated him, he whispered. For so many years. I hated him. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I know. He looked at me then, his expression crumbling. I don't know what to do with this. His voice was barely a breath. I don't know how to feel. I reached out, hesitant, placing a hand on his arm. Then don't decide today. For a long moment, we stood there. Two people bound by tragedy, by loss, by the unchangeable past. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel unbearable. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling the fallen leaves around us. Daniel stood motionless, the letter trembling in his hands. His eyes moving over the words again and again as if willing them to change. But they wouldn't. They never could. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He clenched his jaw, his breath uneven. The weight of grief and rage that he had carried for years was colliding with a truth he hadn't been prepared to face. I swallowed hard, my own emotions clawing at my throat. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Daniel exhaled a shuddering breath and looked at me. His eyes were red, his expression conflicted. All these years, he whispered, shaking his head. I thought I knew who he was. I hesitated. So did I. His laugh was bitter, barely more than a breath. I wanted revenge, Claire. I wanted to take something from you the way he took from me. His fingers curled around the letter. I thought if I could make you suffer, if I could make you feel just a fraction of what I felt, it would fix something inside me. A lump formed in my throat. And does it? He stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly he shook his head. No, he admitted, his voice raw. It doesn't. His shoulders sagged, as if the years of anger had suddenly become too heavy to carry. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. Daniel, I said gently, you have every right to be angry. You have every right to grieve. But holding on to this hate, it's only been hurting you. His eyes darkened. You think I don't know that? His voice cracked, and for the first time, the walls he had built around himself started to crumble. I wake up every morning thinking about him, about what was taken from me, and every single day, I've let that anger consume me. It's the only thing I had left of my son. My breath caught in my throat. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hands gripping the letter so tightly I feared he might tear it. But this, he exhaled shakily, looking down at the paper as if it had changed everything. This makes it harder to hate him. I let out a slow, uneven breath. Maybe it's not about hate anymore. Daniel swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. For the first time, his expression softened. Not in forgiveness, but in exhaustion. As if he was tired of carrying the pain. His grip on the wooden box loosened. He stared at it for a moment, then held it out toward me. I hesitated, then reached for it, my fingers grazing the worn wood. When it was finally in my hands, I felt the weight of it. Not just its physical presence, but the memories, the history, the secrets it contained. Daniel ran a hand down his face. I don't know what to do now. His voice was barely more than a whisper. I met his gaze. You let go, I said softly. Not for my husband. Not for me. For you. He let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to a sob. His shoulders shook for a brief moment before he turned away, staring out at the empty road. I don't know if I can. I stepped beside him, looking at the same stretch of road, the same endless horizon. Then take it one day at a time. The silence between us wasn't tense anymore. It wasn't filled with rage or resentment. It was something else, something fragile but real. After a long moment, Daniel nodded. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. And for now, it was enough. As I turned to leave, carrying the box with me, I knew that neither of us would ever be the same. But maybe, just maybe, we had finally taken the first step toward healing.